folks to get through for our 596A presentations. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's presentations. We have, as I said, six very interesting talks lined up, so I hope you're ready for some interesting presentations on from the MGIS program. A couple things: every presenter has 25 minutes to give their presentation. There'll be 5 minutes for questions, and as you finish and are prepared to answer questions, please read the question out loud so the question could get recorded, because the chat window doesn't get recorded during the recording session. And with that, I think we're ready to start. So our first presenter is Selena Soto, and she'll be talking to us today about On the Line, building a mobile application for wildland firefighters. Selena, when you're ready.
Okay, thanks. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Selena Soto, and like Fritz said, this is my presentation on building a mobile application for wildland firefighters. And today I want to talk to you about my background in wildland firefighting and how this experience has made me pretty passionate about creating a mobile app that will hopefully help wildland firefighters working on large incidents. I also want to discuss similar applications and their core features that I would like to incorporate to my own application if time. I hope to eventually call the finished product On the Line, hence the title. A little bit of background information about myself is that I graduated with a bachelor's degree in anthropology with a focus on archaeology from Grand Valley State University in Michigan. I ended up taking an archaeological internship out west in Arizona that eventually led me to a gig with the Forest Service, where my boss signed me up for fire school. Being a kid from the Midwest, I had no clue what fire school was, nor did I know a ton about wildland fires. So I spent a week up at Bryce Canyon National Park learning about the fire triangle, the 10 standard firefighting orders, and 18 watch-out situations. And after I was red carded, or in other words, qualified to be on a fire line, I was able to volunteer on a managed fire on my own forest, and that was when I was hooked. The next season, I worked on an engine and began my wildland firefighting career. In total, I have worked 4 seasons as a wildland firefighter that make up my professional experience: 2 seasons on an engine and 2 seasons on a hotshot crew. But my most memorable experiences, the ones that have made me pretty passionate about this topic, comes from my 2 seasons on Feather River hotshots. Being on a hotshot crew, I went to a lot of larger wildland fire incidents. I was able to experience fire behavior up close and see how wildland firefighters fought fire with fire. In this picture, I'm holding a drip torch, and I was bringing strips of fire to create a buffer for when the main fire would hit that section of land. One of the most common strategies lately is doing a big box around the main fire. So crews are working off forest roads and/or dozer lines, and they create large buffers to try to corral the main fire in hopes that it burns itself out. There are a lot of moving parts that go into fighting fire, such as communications, escape routes, safety zones, having lookouts that keep an eye on the fire's behavior, and where locations of crews are in relation to the fire. There's wind and weather changes, there's terrain, fuel and vegetation that is on that terrain. So in this photo, my crew was hiking down the hand line, prepping it for the main fire to hit it, which, as you can see, is in the distance. And this is a good example, though, of how crews are pretty comfortable with getting close to the fire, but they need to always have their heads on a swivel for any wind and/or weather changes. That kind of terrain, canyons, and rugged fingers can cause winds to push the fire up the hill faster, and this leads to unsafe situations. Another common tactic that firefighters use is burning at night when the relative humidity is higher. However, burning at night can make it really hard to see your surroundings and your terrain. In this picture, the ground is pretty flat, but most of the time it's not that flat. So when wildland firefighters burn at night or in the day, there are always crews holding. And holding means that crews spread out down the road or dozer line and make sure that the fire does not get on the side it's not supposed to. And so all these factors and strategies that I'm mentioning, these are just a few of the many that can affect how wildland firefighters interact with large fires. Another way that firefighters interact with large fires is by navigating them. So one main tool that wildland firefighters use is a mobile application called Avenza. The Forest Service made a contract with Avenza in 2012, and they've been using it ever since. The mobile application stores multiple PDFs of topographic type maps of the fire. And this is my picture on the left-hand side, the first picture. You can see the folders with all the maps in them. And then it also is able to geolocate where a firefighter is on the map, and that's my second picture from the left. It contains a decent amount of features to help record an individual's tracks, elevation status, and it comes with a compass tool. So Avenza is heavily relied on to know where hand lines or dozer lines are on the fire and which division a crew is assigned to. And it sounds like the perfect app, right? So what's it missing? When talking to other firefighters on the line, I noticed that quite a few of them don't even use Avenza. Some use a form of Google Maps with an imagery base map, or they use Forest Maps or Onyx Hunt. The main concern with Avenza is its limitation of solely using topographic maps that can't be zoomed in far enough to show features on the map. This can be a huge worry for firefighters, as many of them need to scout their section of the fire line. It can also consume a decent amount of time for overhead to scout ahead for their crews or dozers that need to get up steep terrain. Understanding this frustration firsthand made me want to create some sort of mobile application that is specific to the situations and surroundings of wildland firefighters. This is where On the Line comes in. By 596B, I am hoping to have created a mobile application that fills in those gaps from the Avenza app. I am aiming to create an application that uses multiple base maps so that wildland firefighters can navigate their terrain with ease and improve their situational awareness. Creating a mobile app like this could help save time and energy that firefighters exert scouting their divisions. So why is creating a mobile application with multiple base maps important when there are obviously other apps out there being used on the fire line? Well, for starters, most of the apps being used on the fire line cater more to the overhead and those managing the fire rather than for those that are always on the fire line. For example, Arc Collector is used by field observers, safety line officers, and resource advisors, or READs. Arc Collector allows those walking the fire line to record their tracks and record any observations they see. These recorded features are then synced when these overhead go back to fire camp where Wi-Fi is available. In this way, the overhead stay informed on where the dozer lines and hand lines are located so they can strategize their plan for the next day. This app, however, is not available for crews working the fire, either due to cost or because syncing the data would take a long time, and it could get chaotic if all fire users were allowed to edit and record features. Another mobile application that came out recently in 2020 is called Wildfire Safe. This application allows overhead to see a 7-day weather forecast in the area of the fire that they are looking at. It also has many features and implements remote sensing and fuel moisture to help determine fire weather and potential. This sounds like a great application, but so far, again, it's only used by overhead. So maybe in the future, the plan could be to extend to all firefighters, but I have not come across any sources that say so. Therefore, if this app is not being used by all on the fire line, then this means that crews are still using Avenza and they're still unsatisfied with their main tool of navigating the fire. So the folks that are always on the fire line, 16 hours a day or longer, should have access to some sort of mobile application that will help them scout ahead and help them make decisions on what route to hike in or have a dozer go in. I think having a tool like this could save a lot of time and energy and improve situational awareness. Having access to only topographic maps, it limits the viewpoints of wildland firefighters. They only know what they see from a distance or what's right next to them. They can't always tell what kind of fuel or hidden terrain lies between them and the main fire. So getting started. In order to get started on my project idea, the first step was to look at similar applications to see what they featured. I reviewed 20 mobile applications that dealt with natural disasters, emergencies, weather, and outdoor activities. I figured these types of applications would have features that I might want to incorporate to my own mobile application in the future. When looking at these similar applications, many core features identified were being able to work offline. As you can see here, that was in 18 out of the 20 of the applications. And then there was tools that could be helpful to the user, such as a compass or camera feature, and that also had 18 out of 20. And then there were thematic layers and map overlays, georeferencing a person's current location, recording and editing features, weather and radar information, multiple base maps, and emergency notifications. A few even had a lifeline feature that would share with family and friends a notification if a person has been away for too long on a hike. So as was shown in that bar graph, there are 5 core features that are present in over 55% of the mobile applications reviewed. These main core features are having the app work offline, providing some sort of tools for the user to enhance their experience, thematic layers and overlays. For example, one of the applications reviewed, Onyx Hunt, contains past fire history layers for hunters to be able to find better game in those areas. And then the fourth core feature was showing a user's location. And the fifth was being able to record features such as a person's tracks while hiking. So based off this information gathered, I would love to attempt all of the ones on that last slide. But with my time and my limited programming experience, I would like to at least be able to provide thematic layers or map overlays, georeference a user's current location, and record features. I also would like to provide tools for the user. And the main tools I would like to focus on are calculating area and measuring distance so firefighters are able to calculate the area of spot fires. And if time allows, I would love to provide the user with a compass and possibly the camera feature so the user is able to take pictures of the features they record. And ideally, making it work offline would be my priority, as its purpose is to work outside away from Wi-Fi. However, with my coding experience, the working offline function might be something I attempt at the end to ensure my other core features work properly. If I do have time and I can get it to work offline, I hope to try to tackle inputting multiple base maps and being able to share maps if the user on the fire line had not downloaded the map beforehand. So in order to build my application with the core features I want, I was able to look at two platforms a little bit more in depth that I thought would be able to help me achieve my goals. At first, I focused on ArcGIS App Studio, since this platform allows a developer to create an offline application, which I've mentioned before, that's quite a necessity to have while working outside. And while testing out App Studio, I noticed that the platform has multiple templates to get a developer started. There's also a decent amount of documentation on learning how to add widgets and navigate the platform. I also like that App Studio could distribute the app on a desktop, iOS device, or Android device. It appears to have everything I need to create and distribute a mobile application that works offline. But what's the catch? When diving into this platform a little bit more, I found that the tutorials and templates can help me create a rough draft of a mobile application. But to actually customize it, I ran into needing to know how to code QML. I have minimal experience with coding, only having taken Geography 485, the Python class, and I'm currently finishing up Geography 585, Open Web Mapping. So when I tried to work with the code, my lack of experience may have made it more difficult to create a mobile app template to my liking. I also got confused with how ArcGIS App Studio was set up. I had to first access ArcGIS App Studio, but then to edit the application, I had to use Qt Creator, and then Qt Creator contained multiple files to code the app, and then I would get lost in which file I could work on to edit it. I also had a hard time figuring out multiple bugs with the newest version of Qt Creator. So based off all of these situations, ArcGIS App Studio, it might not be the perfect fit for my programming experience level, so I did look into another platform that involved a little bit less coding. The second platform option for building my mobile application is ArcGIS Experience Builder. This platform supposedly has very minimal coding, where it lets you drag and drop widgets that you want to add to your application. And it is also very easy to upload map data. And then when running it, the preview was easier to test run, whereas App Studio, it was a little bit harder to preview the applications. But what were my concerns with this platform? Well, for starters, ArcGIS Experience Builder runs on ArcGIS API for JavaScript rather than ArcGIS Runtime API, which means it doesn't work offline. But even though the app might not work offline, my experience attempting to create a rough template was quite easier than using App Studio. However, many of the widgets are Esri templates, and in order to customize them, I believe I have to use the ArcGIS Experience Builder, the developer edition, which would require me to do some coding. I did not look into this too much yet, as my goal is to try to create a mobile application that does work offline. When looking over the two platforms again, I do want to attempt using ArcGIS App Studio, as it will allow me to actually make my mobile application useful to those working outside away from Wi-Fi. This is a project I am very passionate about, and I want to spend time on getting it to work as much as possible, even with my minimal coding experience. My time frame to start working on my mobile application is quite flexible. I plan on taking 596B in the fall of 2023, so I am hoping I have time to work on my application in my off time and in between classes. I'm also hoping that my future classes that I am taking will improve my coding experience. And then eventually, if I decide I am not able to figure out ArcGIS App Studio as I had hoped, I will use ArcGIS Experience Builder as my platform backup to still create a mobile application that functions online. If anyone has suggestions on other platforms that I could use, please let me know after this presentation. And then at this time, I want to thank all of you for taking the time today to listen to my presentation. This is a topic very close to my heart. And at the end of this master's program, I really do hope to have created my mobile application on the line, as not only would it be helpful to wildland firefighters on the fire line, but it is also helping those that I consider my family. At this time, I would like to take any questions or comments from the audience.
Very impressive presentation. What a great idea. I'm sure there's a tremendous practicality behind your proposed application. While folks are getting ready, looks like there's a question already in the chat window.
Yeah, it's actually a suggestion, which I'm grateful for. It was ArcGIS Web App Builder is another great low/no code option. I'm unsure of the offline capabilities though. So thanks, Jeremy. I'll look that up later. I'm gonna write that down.
While others are getting a question ready, I have a thought. I'm not sure how well this is utilized or if it's something that the firefighters do. You talk almost exclusively about topographic maps, yet there's no use of like 3D DEMs to examine fire and positioning of the crews. Is that something that gets used much out there?
No, so that's the thing. That's why I get a little frustrated, because the overhead, they're starting to look into those possibilities for themselves, and they do help manage, they're managing the fire. So they're putting crews in certain locations, but the ones that are like there's young kids out there, like 18s to their early 20s. And then there's there's all ages out there, but there's green people. And so, they always tell us like, if you see something, say something, but like the tools that we have on a topographic map, I feel like it's limited to, to see your surroundings. So like having those bare like earth models, like the DEMs and imagery layers, I think that could really help everybody on the fire line, not just those managing it, but everyone to understand the big picture of the fire and be able to navigate it a little bit more safely. The 3D models would be awesome if someone could use that on the line.
Yeah, obviously there'd have to be some training. I'm sure some people don't understand what those really mean, right, or represent.
Yeah, no, I think they'd be able to pick up on it. I think people would be.
But then kind of the follow-up is that, some of those layers are pretty computationally intensive for a smartphone, and how well your app would handle like a true 3D, and you could rotate it and spin it and those kind of things.
Yeah.
If that's resource intensive or not.
Right. So that's why I have, for the base maps that I was thinking about for sure keeping the topographic map. That's always nice. And then an imagery one, because that seems to be what most firefighters are using. And then I think I do want to use like a bare earth model, the DM model, to like, so they can see where roads are. Because a lot of those times you can't see it with all the vegetation, because at previous fires, they might have bulldozed something, or there was an old Forest Service road that you can't see now. I don't know if I could try the 3D, but I do think the 3D might be a little bit harder on the mobile application to use and upload and make it fast for people to use.
Yeah. You do have a question, and oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. And I do have a question. Says, nice work, Selena. What are some of the ways you think you could evaluate the final result? I think I would love to be able to try to test it outside by myself if it would work, if it does work offline. Or even if it doesn't work offline, I could try an area where I have cell service. And then if it does go pretty well, I would like to be able to let some of my old crewmates test it out and see if they liked it. And if they don't, then we'll go back and fix it.
All right, anyone else have questions for Selena? Selena, if you could put your email address in there, if someone has a follow-up question, they can contact you through that medium.
For sure.
That would be great. And next up, we have Brooks Mitchell. Brooks, if you want to start sharing your screen, that'd be great. All right, looks good. Looks good. So, all right. So our next presenter today is Brooks Mitchell, who will be talking to us about mapping the impact of public library programming on youth academic success in the Mountain West. So, Brooks, whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks, Fritz. And just a heads up, I'm been a little under the weather, so if I need to step away for just a second, I'll mute my microphone and drink some water and get back to it. So thank you all for joining me today. My name is Brooks Mitchell, and I'm based out of Longmont, Colorado. I have an undergraduate degree in geology from the University of Alabama. And I currently work in the field of informal education. So I work for the Space Science Institute. It's a federally funded nonprofit research and education organization. And my work specifically focuses on bringing science-focused educational opportunities to informal learning organizations like museums and public libraries. So my work doesn't explicitly involve GIS or a lot of geospatial technology in the day-to-day, but there are numerous intrinsic geospatial connections in my work that I'm beginning to explore and work on as I wrap up my master's in geographic information systems journey with Penn State. So I really appreciate you all joining me today as I discuss my capstone proposal. It's been a long journey to get here, and my advisor is Nathan Picklick, and we've had a lot of really great conversations getting to this final presentation of my proposal. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off. So yes, a brief agenda overview. My headers of my slides might not quite match this agenda perfectly, but what we'll basically be talking about today is I'll introduce my project and focus a little bit on the project's background, review some of the project's objectives, the methodology, timeline, and then talk about my anticipated results that I expect to see with my project, and end with my presentation venue, or in this case, presentation venues. And so I've included just a photo over here just to jazz up this slide a little bit. This is some library patrons with public library I work with. I'm practicing safe solar viewing during a STEM program. So public libraries have a long historical precedence of providing informal learning opportunities for the communities that they serve, but they currently stand at a crossroads in the services that they provide. They're being asked to do more with less. They face competing demands from different patrons and oftentimes from the same patron. So an example of this would be that one patron might come in for tax preparation help. They might also come in for a book club. They could come in for a community dialogue conversation, and they might also come in for help learning how to use their computer. Modern day library services extend far beyond just circulating books. They include job skill development, internet and technology access, public discussion, multi-generational educational programming. And so this is not just something that libraries are doing and making these changes themselves. This comes as a result of requests from the communities that they serve. A 2015 Pew survey showed that the majority of Americans definitely want libraries to offer early childhood literacy programs, more coordination with local schools to distribute resources and information, multi-generational digital training, so that's training on how to use a laptop, how to use a tablet, how to use a cell phone, multi-generational cybersecurity and privacy training, so that's how to be safe online, active military and veteran-focused programming, and that's not it. Also, the majority of Americans definitely want public libraries to offer dedicated working and reading spaces, programs specifically for immigrants, economic development opportunities for local businesses, and maker spaces. So interestingly, 30% of patrons definitely wanted public libraries to actually remove printed materials to make room for space for digital resources, public programs, and meeting room. 30% might not seem like a lot, but when you compare that to the 2012 Pew survey results, which found that only 20% of patrons definitely wanted this represents a 10% increase in public sentiment over just a few years. So when I tell people I work with public libraries, oftentimes they think of this, right? So a giant repository of highly organized books and librarians with a no-nonsense attitude, maybe a tight bun, and they're quick to shh you if you make any noise. But in reality, that is not what the modern day library looks like. The modern day library is a place where library patrons can go and learn about geology from a park ranger. It's a place where youth can experiment with STEM concepts while talking to a NASA scientist. And it's a place where adult patrons can come together to talk about important community issues that impact them. So public libraries are being asked to do more with less. And libraries are really stepping up to the plate in terms of providing more services and public programming. The figure on the right, provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, highlights a pretty dramatic increase in public library programming. Public library program attendance was 82 million in 2008 and 118 million in 2017. This represents an increase of 44%. And although checkout rates and circulation rates of printed materials may be a little less, libraries are used now more than ever in different ways. In fact, 91% of Americans view public libraries as important to their communities, and 76% view them as important to their families. And that data is from 2013. So financial support, on the other hand, has decreased or remained stagnant. Total library expenditures have actually decreased in that same time frame by 3.3%, while staff expenditures have decreased by 1.8%. So once again, public libraries are being asked to do more with less. So how do public library directors and administrators kind of approach this problem, doing more with less? I think back to this quote from Brian Matthews: "We must demonstrate our value through applied relevance instead of fabricating implied needs. On a grand scale, we need to stop thinking in terms of the user being in the library and instead consider how the library fits into the life of the user." In other words, library directors and administrators, in addition to public policymakers, really need to think about their public library offerings in the context of how they impact the community. A body of anecdotal evidence like Campbell 2017, Mitchell et al. 2020, in addition to qualitative studies like Beck 2013 and Jost 2021, exist that highlight a relationship between public library services and positive impact on library patrons. So some qualitative studies have been done. However, there is minimal quantitative analysis on the relationship between public library services and community impact, which is needed for library directors and policymakers to make strategic decisions about the allocation of resources, staff, and budget. Basically, which library services are prioritized within library systems. So this gets to the background. How can we measure public library impact? To consider how I might measure public library impact, I've leaned on two research studies that attempt to provide a quantitative analysis within this field. A recent study, The Returns to Public Library Investment, finds that small-scale capital investments, and that's capital investments $1,000 or greater per student, into public libraries can have a broad positive impact on academic testing scores amongst youth in grades 3 through 8. First, these capital library investments cause patrons to use the library more. More residents visit the library, the stock of library materials increases, and more children attend library events. Second, library capital investments cause students to perform better on standardized tests. In particular, they observe persistent improvements in reading test scores in the years after library capital spending. And this you can see on the figure on the right. These improvements in reading test scores coincide with increases in library use and were not driven by changing demographics in local communities. So within this Gilpin et al. Study, it looked at 5,000 school districts and attributes library services to a school district if a library is within 5 miles of a school district. And that's just using Euclidean kind of as the crow flies distance. It does focus on capital investments and not on specific library services. It uses a difference in event study procedure to measure how an event or treatment affects standardized testing grades in school. Another study that I'm leaning on heavily for my research is geospatial analysis to determine academic success factors in California's K through 12 education. Chu et al. Performed a geospatial analysis of socioeconomic, demographic, and lifestyle predictor variables and the relationship to a response variable of standardized testing scores amongst California high schools. Now, to do this, once again, they used straight line Euclidean distance. They created a 1 mile buffer zone around each high school in California and then enriched that data with predictor variables from the American Community Surveys. After doing some geospatial like hotspot analysis to determine where the trends were occurring, they next used statistical analysis via a stepwise regression to determine how the predictor variables were impacting SAT scores and to what extent. They started with 23 predictor variables and did a stepwise regression eliminating 17. And at the end, they found that 6 predictor variables were statistically significant: average household size, spending index on health insurance, number of multi-generational households, number of husband-wife households, diversity index, and lastly, number of educational services available to the study area. So my exploratory geospatial analysis will build off the work of Gilpin et al. And exploring how public libraries affect academic success within school districts. And it'll build off of Chu et al. And looking at many socioeconomic, lifestyle, and demographic predictor variables, including public library programming, within a regression analysis that considers and limits collinearity to determine which predictor variables influence youth academic success and to what degree. Now, its methods will build off of PARC, and this is something I haven't, a research study that I did not discuss in the last slide, and using specific GIS techniques to develop accurate public library service areas. As I mentioned, the other two studies use Euclidean distance and just say a library's statistics count if they're within 1 mile or if they are within 5 miles. PARC, on the other hand, discussed how distance, road networks, public transportation, and perceived niceness of a public library could impact the actual geographic service area that a library reaches. That particular study looked at 12 public library branches within Lake County and found that patrons travel on average between 2.37 and 7.93 miles to go to their preferred library. The study makes the case that a broad Euclidean distance standard, such as within 5 miles or within a 1 mile radius, is not necessarily sufficient when discussing a public library's reach. So I want to talk about my goals for this project. And my research is seeking to understand the extent to which public library programs, both alone in consideration with other predictor variables, affects the academic success, which I'm defining by standardized testing scores and graduation rates, of youth in the Mountain West states of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. The goals for my project are to answer these questions. Does any correlation exist between public library program attendance and school district standardized testing scores and graduation rates? And then, if so, how significant is this correlation when we consider numerous other socioeconomic, demographic, and lifestyle variables? Finally, as I mentioned, library directors, administrators, policymakers, they need actionable resources. They need actionable quantitative information to be able to make strategic decisions about how they're allocating their budget, resources, and staff. So a goal is to provide actionable visuals and resources to these people to help them better understand the role of public library programming in youth academic success. So for my study area, I've chosen the 4 corner states in the Mountain West. This would be Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. And I chose these for a few different reasons. Personal familiarity. I work in Colorado. I work with a lot of libraries in this area. And I know that these data sets are available, both from school districts, and I'll get into data sets in just a moment. Both school districts and library programming data sets are available. They're large too, so meaning that I have a lot of different individual sites to look at. And there's physical and demographic geographic diversity within this study area. So there's a diverse physiography containing the following physiographic regions: Great Plain, Rocky Mountain, Basin Range, and Colorado Plateau. And so generally a general terrain trend that you would see is extensive arid terrain with intermittent mountain peaks. There are large urban populations in these 4 states, so Albuquerque, Denver, Salt Lake City, and Phoenix, and large rural spaces. And you see a good bit of racial diversity in New Mexico and Arizona, less so in Colorado, and Utah trends to be a majority white population. So there is a good amount of diversity in looking at a large number of library systems and school districts to kind of help me with my interpreting my results, that we're not just focusing on one specific demographic or one specific geographic area. So next, I would like to talk about some of my data that I'm going to be using for this study. The school district boundaries are going to be pulled from the National Center for Education Statistics. In 2019, school district boundaries are going to be used. Now, this is kind of important because school districts the boundaries change a little bit over years. So going with a constant school district boundary range of 2019 will be important. Standardized testing scores are available from each state education department, and graduation rates are available as well. And those graduation rates and standardized testing scores are often subdivided into how different minorities or minoritized people and different different socioeconomic people have, they're subdivided based on socioeconomic and demographic categories. Public library locations and programming statistics are pulled from the Institute of Museum and Library Services Public Library Survey. Now, this is an annual survey that pulls data on both a individual library outlet and a library system level. And that data ranges back quite a bit. I'm going to be using data ranges from 2009 to 2019. And lastly, in looking at other predictor variables, I'll be pulling these by using the Enrich tool via ArcGIS Pro. And this comes from the American Community Survey 2015 to 2019 averages. This is pulled from the Esri Cloud database. So this is a pretty easy process to have a boundary area, a polygon and to enrich that with data from the Esri Cloud database. So library districts and school districts don't really match up. This is one of the main problems that I'm seeking to address in this study. So if you're looking at this map on the right and it looks confusing, well, good, it should look confusing. This is an overlay of library service areas that's found in purple boundaries and school districts, which are found in black. So you see there's a big mismatch, and oftentimes library service areas aren't actually defined. It may just be, oh, this library serves this county, this library serves this city. There are not actually a lot of available library service area polygons that clearly define which area a library serves. So based on prior literature and data availability, it's necessary for me to create my own library service areas within my research. So to do this, I will perform a cost-weighted distance allocation. And this is kind of a relatively complex procedure, or at least it was to me. The first step with this would be creating a cost distance weighted allocation using the presence of a road, a major road, a highway, or a local road as a friction coefficient, and perform that on an individual library outlet basis. Now, I should clarify, when I say individual library outlets, library systems are made up of individual library outlets. Library systems on average contain 1.8 library outlets, excuse me. To account for the public programming library stats that happen on a system-wide basis, I first need to create a cost-weighted distance allocation on individual library outlets. And then next, I will dissolve the interior boundaries to categorize these library systems. So I think it'd be easier if I just show you a little bit of what this looks like. So these are individual library outlets. So this is branches, bookmobiles within the state of Colorado. And this is what a cost-weighted distance allocation looks like for each of these individual library outlets. Now, when I categorize them based on which library system they belong to and dissolve the internal boundaries, we see quite a few less polygons. So this is the polygons of library system influence. And there's a lot less of those, and that's where the public programming data will exist. So the next step would be to calculate zonal statistics as tables. And to do that, the average number of program attendees within a school district calculated by how much of the school district polygon is occupied by which library. So an example of that would be, let's say school district X contains library systems 1 and 2. Library system 1 facilitated 100 programs in a given year. Library system 2 facilitated 0 programs. Each library system occupies 50% of a school district. So students residing in school district X had an average of 50 public library programs accessible to them. So the results of the preceding methodology will result in a series of data-rich school districts, school district polygons with attribute tables containing academic success data from 2017 to 2019, public library programs offered within school district, and attendance of public library programs from 2009 to 2019, and between 20 to 30 other demographic, lifestyle, and socioeconomic factors. Space for time substitution is going to be kind of employed with this. I don't have a large longitudinal data set that I can look at and look at the change over time. So instead, I'm going to use space for time substitution with a small amount of temporal information and looking at the lag between, excuse me, and looking at the lag between public library programming and graduation rates and standardized testing. I think it's reasonable to assume that public library programs that occurred in 2019, for example, would not impact the graduation rates of within 2019, that impact would happen in the years preceding. So you actually see this in the Gilpin article. They measure those capital infusions, and within about 7 years is when they start to see statistical significance and impact on the communities. So multiple forms, once I have these data-rich tables, multiple forms of regression will be utilized within this exploratory analysis. OLS regression will be used at first to look at the relationship between public library program attendance and academic success. And if not necessary, a nonlinear regression method will be used. So other predictor variables will be introduced and analyzed for significance by using both stepwise regression and ArcGIS Pro's exploratory regression tool. Lastly, a geographically weighted regression may be used to better understand if there are geospatial variations and correlation between predictor and response variables. So personal experience leads me to believe that there is a positive correlation between public library services and youth academic success. I've seen this on many of the projects I work on, and I've had many anecdotal conversations with public libraries. However, research also supports this idea. Gilpin confirms this, although their methods of assigning public libraries to school districts could be improved. Chu et al. Also confirms that access to educational services, which includes but is not limited to public libraries, has a statistically significant impact on standardized testing. I do anticipate that I will find a positive statistical correlation between public library programs and youth academic success. And in some of my prototyping work within the Colorado dataset, I've seen some small statistical correlation. However, I think it'll be less likely than the educational services variable within the Chu study. I also anticipate that this correlation will be stronger amongst populations that use and rely on public library services at a higher rate. This includes low-income students, Hispanic students, and African-American students. This comes from a study just understanding and looking at the rates of library use, and that minoritized people and those with lower incomes in rural areas use library services at a higher rate as compared to non-minoritized incomes and people with higher incomes. I am uncertain as to whether public library programs will necessarily rise to the top of significance when explored alongside those 20 to 30 other predictor variables. And again, performing a stepwise regression analysis and using ArcGIS's exploratory analysis regression analysis tool. Yeah, I'm just not quite sure whether they will be statistically significant when compared to other socioeconomic and demographic variables. So here we have my project timeline. And I know this is pretty fine-grained, but I just wanted to point out the amount of time that's going to be going into data gathering and organizing and data preparation. There are a large amount of data sets that I'm pulling, and I need to kind of clean up, per se, to make sure that library districts match year by year, because library districts do change, or excuse me, library systems do change. And school districts, when I look at those from 2017 to 2019, I also need to make sure that those match up, as some school districts have shifted around a little bit. So I've given myself about 4 weeks for data preparation. And then to perform my exploratory regression, I've given myself 4 weeks to do that. And then 4 weeks to create my paper and create my presentation. Lastly, I'll be presenting my, I have submitted proposals, excuse me, at 2 library-focused conferences that are usually attended by municipal and county level policymakers, library directors, library administrators, and library staff. So I'm really excited about the potential audience at these 2 venues. These are 45-minute to 1-hour sessions, which are a little bit longer than maybe the typical MGIS capstone presentation. But I'm pretty confident that I can fill that time with a little bit more information about GIS and how geospatial technology can be used for library administrators making strategic decisions. I do have a few other presentation opportunities available through my organization, the Space Science Institute. I'm going to hopefully be doing some webinars to a public library audience about this in late December and early spring of next year. And I'll be presenting this information at our annual organizational retreat, which is aptly named Space Jam. And so lastly, I just have a few references here, but I will leave that for folks that are watching the recording to look at. All right.
All right, Brooks, thanks for the presentation. Great job. Glad to see that your work from 586 is matured, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. One question I had, I know this was something that I had commented on earlier in your proposal. And one of that is how are you defining what a library is, and how varied is that definition across, for example, the state of Colorado?
That's a great question, Fred. Thank you for that. And I should acknowledge that some of this work was done in your course, and we had some really great conversations to kind of help me flesh out this idea of a cost distance weighted. A public library is pretty strongly defined as serving a particular municipal, city, or its own specialized library district service area. So there's information from the Institute of Museum and Library Services on what specifically defines a public library. Now, we should differentiate that from school libraries, which are located in elementary and middle schools. And there can be some overlap and there can be some coordination between public and school libraries, but they are defined very different. Public libraries are listed and defined by the American Library Association. So I feel like I have a pretty good standard of what a public library is. Now, I should mention that bookmobile data is included in bookmobile locations and services are included in my data. And because of the nature of a cost distance weighted allocation, I'm not including those bookmobile locations as they're mobile, they're non-stationary, and I don't think it'll work quite as well for this study. They do, sometimes will provide programs, but mostly they're focused on circulating materials.
All right. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. If you open your chat window, looks like you have a question from Adrian.
Yeah, it's such a complex and creative idea for a project. Thank you, Adrian. I definitely felt like it was complex as I was trying to work through it. I'm an avid user and supporter of our local libraries. Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. Now that you need more data, but have you considered surveying library users as to if academic performance is one of the reasons they utilize library services? You touched a bit on this in your anticipated results, who uses the library. That's a great idea, and I do have access to a lot of local libraries. I thought that maybe within the scope of this project, going out and doing some surveys, I didn't quite have the time in my proposal, but I think that kind of maybe a little bit more qualitative, like some case studies and conversations with local library patrons could kind of help bolster my study and bolster the importance of my results. So I haven't necessarily considered that just because I felt that it was a little bit outside of the scope, but I think that could be a great idea. Thank you, Adrian. Casey's asking, saying, I love my local libraries, and as a parent, I tend to frequent multiple libraries in the area around town. Are you looking at allowing for overlap of library services? So in using that cost-weighted distance allocation, I am creating individual, I'm calling them polygons of library influence that don't overlap with each other. But when you compare that to school district boundaries, you'll find that a school district maybe is made up of 30% library system A, 50% library system B, and 20% library system C. So I'm averaging those using that Zental statistics strategy to say, again, if it's made up of this percentage of this library system and they do that many number of library programs or have that number of library attendants, I'm averaging them out based on the percentage of the school district that they occupy. I use lots of libraries in our city too. I was thinking of this too when he was thinking about defining the library service areas. So yeah, so if you're in a school district, once again, and you travel, there's 3 or 4 different libraries that you use provided, or 3 or 4 different library systems that you use, I should clarify, because if multiple library outlets are included in the same, if you're going to multiple different library outlets of the same library system, then it's going to have the same public programming statistics. I don't know if I mentioned that or if I clarified that well enough. Public library programming statistics are available, it's a mouthful, on a library system level, and then I'm using geographic information from the library outlet level. So let's say Boulder County Libraries, which has 3 or 4 different libraries, will report that their whole library system serves 1,000 people, as an example, per year. If I go specifically to the Longmont branch of the Boulder County Library, I can't get that information. So I have to create these categorized cost-dated weighted distance polygons and then use data from a system level. And let's see, as you expand on what Adrian is suggesting, I think you could benefit from the use of some data to control for the general attitude of the public towards the use and the perceived use of their local libraries. It's a great suggestion. I think some survey data on public sentiment towards libraries does exist. Have you considered bringing in census demographics data to weigh in other geographic and social attributes? Yeah, so I'm going to be pulling, I mentioned that I'll be looking at 20 to 30 other predictor variables, and that comes from the American Community Survey 2015 to 2019 averages of some of the examples that are diversity index, household spending on health insurance, number of 2-parent households. So yeah, I'll definitely be bringing in other predictor variables to kind of hash out and sort out how statistically significant is public library programming in relation to these other variables. That answers that question. Well, I'll put my email address, and I would love if you reached out with questions, suggestions, or if you just, I know I'm talking a lot and talking fast, so if you just wanted to hear my idea again or anything like that, I would love to hear from any of you. Yeah.
All right, Brooks, thanks again for the presentation and great job. Next up, we have Casey Faust. So Casey, if you want to start sharing your screen, we'll move right along. All right, looks good. So next up, we have Casey Faust, who is going to be speaking to us today on weighted multivariate analysis for rating urban green space. Casey, go ahead.
There we go. Got to unmute myself. All right, so yeah, my presentation is a weighted multivariate rating of urban green space. This is for 596A, and my advisor was David Goldberg. So my agenda for this, I'm going to start out with a little bit of introduction about myself, go into the background information on this, followed up with the proposed methods, where I'm getting my data from, the trial locations, expected results, timeline, and my venue choices. So a little bit about myself. I graduated from Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, which is a small town in Pennsylvania. Joined the military. I was EOD in the military, where I blew things up for 8 years. After that, I got into environmental remediation work. I actually started by cleaning up bombing ranges. This is where I really first saw ArcGIS and just GIS software in general at work. I went on to get my bachelor's degree in biology with an emphasis on ecology. I taught down in Texas for 2 years. And then during the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I moved from Texas back up to Pennsylvania with my wife so she could pursue a career as a nurse practitioner. Since then, I've been a stay-at-home dad and going to school for my master's in GIS. So there's my family outdoors. I don't know if you can tell this or not, but I'm a very avid outdoors person. I really enjoy being outdoors, and I know there's a lot of benefits to it. So this really interested me as a project. So let's first start talking about urban areas. Urban areas are categorized with high population densities, small residential plots, and high traffic. Most of you probably already know this, but when we look at the American Community Survey, they classify urban areas as having a population of at least 5,000 residents and 425 units per square mile. So things are densely packed there. What we're seeing with urbanization trends is that over time, people have been moving from urban areas, like this, the blue line's urban area, or from rural areas, sorry, to urban areas. So in 2000, I believe it was 2008, the crossover occurred where more people were living in urban areas than rural areas. So we're going from having scenery like this to scenery like that. And in the US, 80% of the population actually currently lives in urban areas. Now, the importance of green space in these urban areas, there's been a lot of studies done on this. There is a very strong correlation between mental health and green space. This is shown in lots of research by Berg, Mazzia, Wang. We see physical well-being increasing when green space is accessible and available. We also see perceived health, so just how people feel about their health going up in areas with large amounts of green space. Some of the other things, you have an increase in property values. Businesses are starting to see the importance of green space as well. Amazon expressed that one of their requirements for their second headquarters is that there was a certain amount of green space per capita in the city that they moved to. We also get a reduction in pollution. And one of the big things that I've paid attention to as an ecologist in my background is the reduction of the heat island effect in the cities with the more green space you have. When we look at the standards they have set up for green spaces in cities, we can see that in the Netherlands, they are very big on green space. The standard is 60 square meters per individual of green space within a 500-meter radius of the household. In the UK, you have 2 hectares within 300-meter distance of the house. And the World Health Organization, which most of the member countries follow, is 9 square meters per capita within a 15-minute walk. All 3 of these, they disregard socioeconomic status because they set either a distance or a walking time. So they use a universal form of transportation. So the question I had was, how do we create a rating that works with any of these standards? So I first had to look at the commonalities. All of them had an amount of green space, an area of green space per capita, or just an amount of green space surrounding a person's house. They all had a distance to the house, even if it was a walking distance. And then recently, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization started putting out memos recommending equitable distribution to all residents for green space. Most of the current rating methods that they have focus on the area of green space per capita or the distance to green space. It wasn't until very recently that people started looking at equitability of green space. And that is being led by research done in Germany and in Turkey right now. So my methodology on this and how I thought best to do the weighted multivariate analysis was to give percentages to each portion of it. So availability, I'm giving 70% to. If we look at the World Health Organization standards, that's saying, is there 9 square meters per capita of green space available? That is, by all standards, the most important aspect of it, even by the health standards and everything, because the catchment areas that they use when discussing this range from 200 meters to 3 miles. So the availability is the most important as far as the benefits go. Accessibility gets 20% because people still need access to it. It's still more important than equitability, and it's the most recent addition to the World Health Organization standards. Equitability hasn't come yet, but with all of these references that they're making to it in their releases, I do believe that they're going to add an equitability factor to the World Health Organization standards. So when we look at availability, it's actually fairly simple. We just look at the total urban green space and divide it by the urban population. That provides us with the area of green space per capita. And then we're going to compare that to the area of green space per capita and divide that by what the country standard is. So in my example, I used 54,000 square meters of green space over here, population of 5,200 individuals, and use the World Health Organization standard of 9 square meters of green space per individual. So all we do is take the 54,000 square meters divided by the total number of individuals, and we get 10.38 square meters per individual. Seeing that, you know it's above the 9 square meter per individual standard. So in this category of availability, they get 100%. Next, you have accessibility, and this is just the percentage of residents within the country's standard for distance. So for my example, I'm saying there are 5,200 individuals. Again, I'm using the same example city. Population within 1,000 meters, which is what is determined for the 15-minute walking distance for the World Health Organization. You've got 4,400 individuals. So if we take those 4,400 individuals divided by the total in the city, you get 84.62%. And this is all going to make more sense when I get to the maps later on. Equitability was a little bit tougher to come up with a method for. Based on the research being done in Germany by Xi, Liu, and Wen, they've been using a modified 2-step floating catchment to identify equitability on the park areas. The next slide, I'll go over that. What we're going to do with this is we take the percentage of residents within 25% of the average accessible area of green space. So if I go back to my example city, there's 5,200 people, and we have 3,800 people within the average area of green space plus or minus 25%. And that gives us 73.1% of the total people being in the equitable range. So quick explanation on the modified 2-step floating catchment area. Basically, we've got Park A over here and Park B over here. Park A, when you look at the total residents in the catchment area, has 4.2 meters squared per individual. Park B has 3.7 meters squared per individual, but there's overlap right in the middle. So in that overlap area, you just add those together and you would get 7.9 square meters per individual in that overlap area. So if we look at our example city, it gives us a final score of 94.23 out of 100. You can see the availability gives you, at 100% gives you 70 out of 70. The accessibility at 84.62% gives you 16.92 out of 20. And the equitability, which is 73.1%, gives you 7.31 out of 10. So they're all broken down. And in the final product, the maps are actually broken down to show the different categories. All of my data is coming from the American Community Survey, the DCNR Local Park Survey, along with the Trust for Public Lands Park Serve system. I found that They differ slightly on the parks. So I've had to compare the two and add parks that were missing. I've focused primarily on Pennsylvania, just because that's where I'm from and I know I have access to the data there for my trial cities. So I've been using the PASDA urban boundaries, and that's the Pennsylvania Spatial Data Access. And then I'm going to the individual cities themselves to get the parcel information. My trial cities are Williamsport, Pennsylvania. This city has a population of 27,571, total area of 8.73 square miles, and a total public green space of 482,578 square meters. So I'm focusing only on the public green space owned by the city. The idea behind this and was put forward by all of the other research that I've read is that public green spaces tend to stay, while private green spaces, such as preserves and conservation areas, sometimes go away. So they want to focus on only what the public is actually providing. My next city is Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. This has a population of 13,811, 4 square miles, and has 289,138 square meters. When we look at Bloomsburg, we can see that they really focused on one central park. This is a parking lot for the fairgrounds that is accessible to the public and owned by the public. So there's no infrastructure here. It's just a wide open green area. But they primarily focused on the central park idea. And then the final city is Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Hazleton, Pennsylvania has a population of 24,779 individuals. It's 6 square miles, and the public green space is 91,094 square miles. They focused more on the neighborhood parks. They kind of avoided the central park area, and there's no data on any community parks in the area. So I was actually able to run this rating system through for Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and this is what I expect the data to look like, or similar for all of the other cities. In Williamsport, Pennsylvania, we can look at the accessibility score. This map just shows the areas that have accessibility to parks. So that means they're within 1,000 meters of the park. And then the pink areas are outside of that 1,000 meter area. So they would be considered no accessibility. Now, one of the interesting things about this that I had to take into consideration is highways and waterways. When you're looking at the 1,000 meter boundary, these are accessibility. These typically are barriers to access. If you've got a major road running through, they're difficult to cross. Same with waterways. You have to cross at a single point, like a bridge. So anything on this side of the water is not accessible to people in Williamsport. This roadway here actually has crosswalks all over it. So accessibility was not a problem with crossing over. This is the equitability map. So this shows the equitability or the equitable range in green. That means it falls within 25% of the average area of green space per resident, all the way down to the parcel level. Below equitability is in red. So it falls lower than that 20 or that 75% of the average. And then above equitability is purple. So it falls above 125% of the average. And then we can put them all together and get an overall view of the city. You can see areas where they're doing well with their parks, areas where they're doing poorly in red, and then areas where they're not quite up to the standards of the green areas. And this is primarily designed so that a city planner can go in and look, and when they're planning on putting in a new park, they can pick the areas that really need it, and they can locate that park or the green space in those areas. My timeline for this, I plan to have all of the city ratings done for my trial cities by the end of August 2022. I would like to complete my paper and revisions by September 2022. And I would like to actually submit my findings for publication. But if not, then I would be doing a presentation in November or December of 2022. And for my presentation venues, my initial plan is publication in the Journal of Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. And if I'm unable to attain acceptance for the publication prior to November of 2022, I'll be looking at presenting via Zoom to the Penn State faculty and students. I have been looking at venues to present in. However, with the shortened timeline, I was not able to find one that would actually still accept applications for public or for presentations. And these are the resources I used. So are there any questions? I know that was really short, but.
Well, short's good. You did a great job, so no worries about the time. One question I had for you is, and this may be a little bit beyond what you're looking for in terms of just green space, but are you considering anything about the facilities that are available in these green spaces, or is it just a green space is a green space no matter where the green space is?
So there was a lot of research done on the facilities portion of it, and proper design of green spaces depended on the size that you were putting in. However, with this, the important part is just having the green space. So I'm looking at specifically the green space on this. There was also thought of putting in blue spaces, so waterways. But most of the research that goes behind that discounts the water areas, as you're less likely to find publicly owned water areas, and there's a lot of hazards to people that can't swim. So they focus primarily on the green spaces in this. And even looking into the World Health Organization recommendations, they recommend not treating blue space the same as green space.
All right, well, that's interesting. I can see the rationale there, but I was just curious.
Yep.
Anyone have a question for Casey?
No. All right. Well, I'll put my email address in here in case there are any questions, and then turn it over to the next person.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. So next up, Prasant, if you could start sharing your screen, we'll get that rolling.
Sure. Do you have to wait for our wait for my advisor? She said she's planning to join, so.
Well, we can't sit here for 25 minutes, and I mean the schedule finished up early. I suppose, let's see, Matthew, I mean, I suppose we could flip the order. If you,
Yeah, I don't mind going if.
do you mind going early?
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and do that? Matthew, if you just want to go ahead and we'll flip the order here. You want to go ahead and start sharing your screen?
Yeah, let me just get situated real quick.
Appreciate your flexibility here.
No problem.
All right, you see your screen, so looks good. So our next presenter, kindly being flexible with our schedule here, Matthew Reyes, speaking to us today on analyzing smartphone Z-axis location data, a case study of trade area analysis in dense urban areas to track human movement for site selection. So Matthew, when you're ready.
Well, thank you. Yes, so my presentation kind of is on the same realm as the prior. But yes, so I am Matthew Reyes. I'll be presenting to you my presentation that is a case study. It's novel from my understanding, that focuses on trade area analysis within dense urban areas to kind of give insight as to how we can expand site selection for new developments or relocations. My advisor is Emily Rosamond, and I thank her a lot for all the input she's provided me. So let me just give a quick overview of my presentation. The first thing I'm going to do, just for familiarity, is just give an understanding of what is trade area analysis and site selection, after which I will then be discussing some currently existing trade area analysis approaches. And then finally, I'll be going over a novel approach that will give some idea of a introduction to a three-dimensional trade area analysis. So on the image on the left, that's actually my study region. This is a location within Tampa, Florida, downtown Tampa, Florida, It entails two districts, the Central Business District and the Channel District. And this region is undergoing significant development to include about 30 high-rise buildings. And for trade area analysis in these regions, it's very important for a business to determine if opening a new store or company for that matter is worth their while for the company to be successful. And trade area analysis and site selection, they use information to review instances such as consumer travel paths, where they come from, where they go after they visit a place of interest, analyze preferred demographics or psychographics that they know that their consumers are primarily based on. They analyze traffic density, as well as the study of physical barriers, such as man-made or naturally occurring, like highways, body waters, mountains, things of that nature. Now, adding on to the consumer travel paths, it's essential that that's reviewed because it gives an understanding of the frequency that a consumer happens to visit a location, as well as the dwell time, how long they're at a location. And so these areas are reviewed prior to a company determining a location because they want to understand what the traffic is in that area. Now, there's currently two-dimensional trade area analysis that provides visualization of the demographic and psychographic data, and that's simply made through thematic maps and just providing a visualization of what's taking place of those variables of interest. And typically that's done within a predetermined travel distance or time. And large companies already have an understanding of their preferred clientele, as well as typically how far out they travel to the location of interest. Now, there are some areas, some obstacles when it comes down to site selection. When consumers reside or work in these dense urban areas that do have multi-story buildings. And some of this happens to be when you are residing within a vertical urbanism type scenario, where individuals are residing within the dense areas above the first floor, where there's multiple multi-use buildings. And it's often displayed traveling to the site as opposed to within the site. So to kind of give you a perspective of what common existing trade area analysis approaches are used today, there's three images that you can see. The first image, image one, is a drive time. It's a 1 mile drive time buffer around the study region. And the good thing about drive time is that it utilizes paths of travel to kind of give an understanding of how consumers actually would travel to the location and give a more representation of the true trade area. Now, image two, then you can then visualize the demographics, such as median household income, disposable income, household sizes, to represent if that trade area itself is containing consumers of interest that predict success of a new location. And then lastly, image three are based on rings, Euclidean distance, which represent certain distances of predetermined sizes. So in this case, it's 1 mile, 3 mile, 5 mile. Now, in this scenario, this is a little bit of a limitation because as you can see, there are barriers of water and individuals can't travel through the water in most cases when they're going to a site. So through experience, the rings are useful for just a quick analyzation of distance, but when it comes down to actual travel paths, these are not sufficient. Now, consumer travel paths and dwell time, just to go a little more in depth of that, with the use of cell phones and anonymized data, these are now being utilized, and they have been for quite some time, to gain insight as for path that an individual takes prior to purchase. And then they can also be used to analyze afterwards of where they go. And that's important because it gives understanding of synergy within the area. And gives, so you understand what attracts a customer. The image on the left with the blue cursors is actually a path that I created myself, utilizing an application that I'll discuss later. But it gives an understanding that an individual within a geofenced location can then travel to a store. You can get an understanding of where they travel within the store, and then when they leave, where are they going afterwards. works. Are they going to another location? Are they going home? Whatever it may be. Now, and aside from that, before geofence locations came into play, and even used to today, credit card data is still being used from those companies when a transaction takes place. And that can provide information for amounts spent. It can also give information regarding the zip code that the individual resides. The issue with that when it comes down to understanding human movement is you don't really have an understanding of where exactly they're coming from within the zip code boundary. It's more so of a generalization, and you don't necessarily know what neighborhood they may be coming from, and you don't really even know what paths they take to get to the store. On top of that, some other existing locations, existing methods used are their social media check-ins, which have been around for quite some time now. That's checking in through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media platforms, so companies can track how often you're there. Wi-Fi access points are also used within the buildings. Those can be used to track movement within the store. They can also be tracked to get an understanding of how long you're there, so your dwell time. Now, with dwell time, the image on the far right, that's an example of how data is assessed to determine how long you're there, as well as when you're there. And the importance behind that is not just to determine how long you're there, but it also has a direct correlation with your spending. So companies utilize that information to kind of also assess the predictions of success. The last part of existing, sorry, my screen's being a little slow. There we go. The last part of the existing practices used are stationary points, and it still utilizes anonymous cell phone data. Sometimes the stationary points are referred to as common evening and common daytime. And this provides just generalization of where are you at primarily during the day and where are you at primarily at night. And that typically comes down to where are you at, where's your home, and where's your place of work. It's up to the analyst to realize that individuals work at different times of the day. Some may work at night, some may work during the day. So when they go through and analyze this, they are to depict that when they're going through the data. So as you can see, this is a two-dimensional plane. It has its limitations. If these were high-rise or multi-story buildings, you wouldn't exactly know where they are within that building. So my novel approach goes beyond that. And as you see in the image on the right there, it's a representation of vertical urbanism. Buildings themselves, high-rise, multi-story buildings, can consist of multi-use establishments consisting of residential, office spaces, commercial, dining, retail, whatever it may be, and they can be interconnected if need be. So that way the consumer itself does not have to travel far to get to a company or a store. So my goals and objectives of this case study are to conduct some study trials that will redefine my data gathering, as well as redefine the interpolation methods I have proposed, and also understand what parameters I truly need to focus on to make the best calculations from any cell phone z-axis data I gather, which I'll explain in a second how that's gathered. Also, I want to reduce the fog of war for commercial development and site selection ambiguity in vertical urban locations through personal experience and my background in site selection. Areas, particularly for restaurants, they're typically avoiding these urban areas because it's very challenging to predict a store's success in these dense locations where there's constant movement, and it's very challenging to understand where your consumers are within these locations. I also want to represent consumer vertical travel paths in dense urban regions by use of cell phone barometric pressure sensors. Another goal is to expand voxel layer use into commercial and urban development. Voxel layers, through my understanding and research, are primarily used for environmental studies. And I'm trying to get an understanding of how to expand this into the commercial world. And then lastly, I would like to demonstrate effectiveness of interpolating consumer attributes on a z-axis scale. So how am I going to go about doing this? So I have a 4-step methodology that I've planned out. And the first step is just to get some building height data in my study region. And that's going to consist of utilizing some publicly available LiDAR data to create an NDSM. And any information that's not available for height data, for example, if a building was constructed afterwards, then I'll contact the city to get that information However, with that data, I'll then be able to get to step 2, which is to digitize the buildings to create a local scene. And then after that, then I'll finally be able to get to my study, which is setting up a voxel layer. And the voxel layer consists of consumer point data for the most part. And the consumer point data is the device data, which demonstrates where a device is located horizontally as well as vertically. And my intent is to create interpolation using empirical Bayesian kringing, and then utilize that to import to a net CDF that'll give me my voxel layer. And then once I have that representation created, I'll then be able to do some inspection of my results, and I'll be able to extract any unique values of interest, parameters of interest. So I want to go through these 4 steps real briefly in regards to how I'll go about doing these 4 steps. The first one, though, is I want to get an understanding of how am I getting my consumer point data. So through research and consultation, there's a company known as NextNav, and NextNav granted me access to their API, which is known as Pinnacle. And they happen to have the ability to gather device location, vertical location, utilizing the barometric pressure sensors within the phones. Now, barometric pressure sensors have been around since roughly 2015 in cell phones, and utilizing the information is nothing new. However, the prior methods have utilized the barometric pressure sensors along with survey data, USGS sea level survey data. And essentially what's done to get an ideal location, vertical location, is the barometric pressure sensor gives an idea of your vertical level, and then the barometric pressure sensor sea level is then just simply subtracted from the 2. But there are some concerns with that method due to inaccuracies of horizontal coordinate data. And that if you look at the image on the left, the image, the individual image happens to be on a hill. In reality, they should be in the blue building. So if your GPS coordinates are off, your lat long coordinates are off, then your vertical location, when you're subtracting the 2 values, will then give you a misrepresentation of your true height. So NextNav, what they have done is they've built an infrastructure to where within 90% of the continental United States multi-story buildings that are at least 3 feet, they've placed barometric pressure reference stations that communicate with your cell phone that's also communicating with the API to get an understanding of what floor you are on based on those pressure sensors alone. Now, studies have also been undergone to get an understanding of the accuracies, and this is deemed to be one of the more accurate approaches to gather vertical height data from cell phones alone. From that, once I have the point data, my intent is to simply, as I mentioned, get the LiDAR data. This is a quick representation. The top image are all the point cloud data. And then from there, I'll just extract the ground point data and then the first returns. And that'll give you my NDSM, which is shown in the gray tones. That has a hill shade background, just kind of give contextual background understanding. But I'll use that information along with the city of Tampa's information for building height that I don't have from the LiDAR alone to then go ahead and develop my overall 3D scene. And once I have my 3D scene, then I can start getting more visual understanding of vertical positioning. The purple buildings are my 3D scene of the actual study region itself. The image in the middle are actual movement that I've done using the Pinnacle app. And it demonstrates within the blue where my cursor's at on the 5th floor of this local university college of medicine. I traveled downward and then I traveled a path to where I cross the street and then I get into a local grocery store. And this gives perspective because on a 2D plane, you wouldn't know exactly what floor I'm coming from. So for example, if these were apartment buildings, it would be important to get some understanding of what floor of the building are the majority of your customers coming from. Also, that ties into the last image on the right, which are some arbitrary points just for the sake of this presentation to represent the stationary points, the common evening and common daytime. On the 2D plane, these were presented, but we didn't know what floor they were on. And the intent with the Z-axis data is to demonstrate, once again, where your preferred clients, customers reside and where they're at exactly in the building. Now, once this data is obtained, then that's once again the voxel layers. So there's 2 images provided on the top left and the bottom left. The top left is representing the results utilizing empirical Bayesian kringing And the bottom left are representing the results of the voxel layer in a three-dimensional scale. Now, for those who aren't familiar, a voxel layer is a tool that can be used to represent multi-dimensional data, spatial, temporal. That way you can see change in the 3D scale. But based on this, what's happening is that all the stationary points are having horizontal slices for each level of the building. And it's being interpolated based on any attribute, consumer attribute you want. In this case, it was median household income. And all the median household incomes are interpolated so you can get a prediction of what household incomes are where. And then the bottom image, the symbology was simply adjusted to represent the preferred consumer income that you want. In this case, it was $60,000. And this is the main thing that I would like to expand on and try to get an understanding of how I can improve this. Now, I do understand that there were roughly 100 points in this case. And I know in a trade area, there's going to be vast amount more. So part of my study will be incorporating adding more data points to better accurately represent the scenario at hand. So with that being said, my project timeline is roughly 11 weeks. For the first 2 weeks are me conducting field tests to gather point data with the Z-axis utilizing the NextNav API. And then at the very end, I'll have 2 weeks to finalize my research paper. And then everything in between is creating my scenes and just developing the model itself. And my presentation venue takes place December 9th and 10th at the International Conference on Urban Environment, Environmental Degradation, Urban Planning. It's virtual, so that helps me regarding travel. Now, anticipated results and as well as concerns. This is a pilot program itself. To my knowledge, once again, this is novel. I've never seen anything being conducted in this manner. So I'm trying to develop some pilot program that can, lead the way into future development of assessing this area of interest, as well as I would like to create accurate vertical consumer profile representations. And that ties in hand with the pilot program itself. The last bullet point represents my concern is the ethical concerns regarding consumer privacy. Utilizing cell phone data itself is a concern. And on a 2D scale, anonymized cell phone data has a geomask placed over it, probability geomask. So you don't know exactly where the consumer is. You can make general consensus. On a vertical level, that does kind of more hone in exactly where an individual resides on a vertical level. However, I'm not too concerned for the pilot program itself. For one, the FCC is adopting vertical level information from NextNav itself. Also, companies utilize NextNav's application API for like food delivery. So as long as the consumer agrees to the privacy issues at hand, I don't foresee necessarily a huge concern regarding this, but that's to find out as this moves forward. With that said, here are my references. And that's everything I have. So if you have any questions, I appreciate it. And thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Matthew. That's a very interesting person-centric project, right? Very, very novel approach there. Looks like you have a question in the chat window.
Yeah. Yeah, so Dan Steiner says, Matt, great plan for your project. If you were describing the use of voxel layers to consumers or business people, how would you basically describe spatial analysis with voxel layers? So in a nutshell, the first thing regarding explaining to consumers, in this case, it would be company owners or high up business decision makers, would be voxel layers provide an understanding of how to see where your consumers reside on a three-dimensional scale, on a vertical scale. It gives better insight of not relying on understanding traditionally where your customers are traveling from outward. That's very common nowadays, where we usually focus on customers traveling great distances out to your store, whereas in dense urban areas, they're already there. And that's one area where companies lack that insight to see where they are exactly within a dense location. So voxel layers provide that insight so you can have a 3D scale and then also make some predictions of how of what attributes will be there, where they are if you don't have, points for everything. And then further, you can expand for future temporal timeframes. You can expand beyond just a certain date. You can also go past dates and other areas of that nature.
Yeah, I was happy to hear you talk a little bit about using barometric pressure for vertical heights. The USGS, their height system, if you will, shows up on topographic maps is referred to as orthometric height. And its foundation is North American Datum of 1988, NAVD 88, which has a bias to it. It's tilted to the northwest, and it doesn't give sea level heights. The National Geodetic Survey, which is controlling or publishing NAVD 88, is in 2025 will release the new vertical datum, which is geopotential datum, which is based on gravity, which will give a very different height resolution than what NAVD 88 will. It's expected that when the new geopotential datum becomes realized, that you'll have sub-centimeter accuracies with your height. So it'd be interesting to see in a few years' time where the technology goes, if in fact they would abandon or minimize the reliance on barometric pressure for your heighting, especially given the gravimetric geopotential datum that is going to be released for the U.S.
Right. Yeah, and I agree, particularly with kind of improvement of GPS locations itself, not relying on satellite GPS, but more so changing the infrastructure to where location capabilities are placed on buildings on themselves. That will also change things too. And NextNav actually has infrastructure there as well. They don't just necessarily use barometric pressure sensors. They use and I forgot what they worded as, but they have infrastructure placed on buildings to get coordinate location too. So they're trying to tighten up the accuracy of location.
It's all about location, right?
It is. Well, I will share my email as everyone else has. If there's any intriguing questions you have for me or anything that will help me grow, I appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
All right, Prasanth, if you want to try to share your screen, we'll get you set up. All right, we see your screen. All right, so our next presenter is Prasanth Ramachandran. He's going to be talking to us today about monitoring height growth and vegetation surrounding power lines using machine learning. So Prasanth, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So I'm Prashant. I'm from Texas, especially from Dallas area. I work for a utility company, and they are focused on electricity. So we as an organization only deals with transmission, distribution, and of course the IT department. So for any electricity, it has to be generated from a power plant, need to be sent to a customer site. So in between, we have two different departments dealing with it. One is transmission, another one is distribution. Transmission, which is responsible for getting the electricity from power plants to the nearby substation. And from that substation, it will be sent to a customer site using distribution feeders. So since I work with transmission department, so I will be focusing just on transmissions. For transmission, we have to carry electricity from power plants to the substations. And usually they are very high voltage that varies from 60 kilowatts to 60 kV to 500 kV. So it can vary any number. In our organization, we have 69, 138, and 345s. These are the only three voltages that we carry. And due to this high voltage, usually those electric cables or the transmission is highly regulated. So they have to follow certain regulations to carry those electricity, and also to avoid any kind of outages. So that being said, for transmission, especially for transmission poles, there is something called a wire zone, which is no tree. There should not be any tree. And beyond that, there can be small trees and bushes. And then there is outer region, which can vary any tree that grows at any height. But I am going to focus on the wire zone, where there is no tree allowed. There's a reason for that. So wire zone, usually it is called right of way or easements. So again, it is a no tree zone, or it has to be less than 15 feet at its maturity. So if it goes beyond 15 feet, it's an encroachment, it is a power hazard. And again, there is a lot of regulations. Due to that, every utility company has to run through an inspection every year. They have to show reports on how the inspection is done and how many are no tree zone. And also there is a separate vegetation team on every utility every utility company. Usually the inspection happens by human workforce. They usually walk the line. It'll be miles of a line. They take a truck, they go a pole by pole, and they verify every aspect of the pole, trees around it, the height around it, and the transmission lines and its capacity to transfer the electricity. And another way of inspecting is aerial inspection. They use helicopters, they run through the lines and they take photos, and those photos and videos are sent back to the vegetation team back at the office, and either they'll go through manual inspections or they'll be run through some kind of machine learning algorithms on those photos and try to identify any kind of inspections. And another one is UAVs. Again, these inspections are very, the UAV inspection especially is very time consuming. And in fact, actually human workforce, aerial inspections and UAVs is all very time consuming. They are very costly as well. That being said, the only alternative, or at least the alternative that we are looking at, is using satellite imagery. Again, satellite imageries are cheaper, but they are, at this point, utilities companies are not getting what they're looking for. So one of the example that we were looking is calculating the vegetation height from the satellite imagery. As of now, as we speak, there's a lot of studies done using satellite imageries, especially focused on vegetation, but there is very less number of studies conducted to calculate the height, tree height or vegetation canopy height using satellite imageries. Of course, for any height calculations, as of now, we are using LiDAR or UAV data because those has the height information inbuilt with the data itself. However, satellite images does not come with that. So the alternatives to calculate height as of now is to use deep learning frameworks and also use some kind of ground truth to calculate those height. Again, all those complex analysis are done at the forest level. It is not done at the urban area level. So that is something I'll be focusing on. So my project will be focusing on calculating the height around power lines corridor in an urban area, or it's not specific to urban area, but it carries from rural to urban area, but I'll be focusing on power line corridors. So I've did literature review. We've did around 15 papers, and out of those, majority of the review was, or majority of the papers were focused on using truck aerial inspections and or airborne LiDAR scanning footage and surveillance footages. All these papers were focused on using these tools, and the output from these tools are executed or analyzed using machine learning or a manual review to identify all the issues and the encroachment. Usually these results are accurate from these papers, and also the results are very very accurate. However, there is a cost associated with this, and the time is very long to complete any kind of analysis, or even to take the data or capture the images using this process. On top of that, if this analysis or if this inspections have to be done in a repetitive cycle, especially in an year, then again we are running into issues around cost and time, which is heavy burden on utility companies. That is the major concern around using these aerial inspections and UAVs. There's another study done using LiDAR data, which was captured using a global ecosystem dynamic investigation laser instrument to calculate the biomass of forest region. Again, the issue with that with this system is the laser points are spaced at 60 meters long, but the gap between each laser points are 25 meters apart. So that is an issue. So on any given timeline, you won't have a continuous laser points on any given region, which is difficult to calculate the canopy height with LiDAR, with this kind of LiDAR data. And that was a major issue on the previous study. On another study, author used planet satellite imagery and the ground truth as LiDAR in Peru region. However, the LiDAR data is around 7 years old, which does not get an accuracy of the current canopy height. So for utilities, any utility company, the current canopy height is required, like last 6 months canopy height. But that cannot be calculated based on 2013 LiDAR data set. So that was a concern on this. Even though the method is accurate on planet satellite imagery, the LiDAR data set that is used for this analysis is not suitable for our study. And the next study that we found is interesting was using multispectral imagery with LiDAR data using unit architecture. The authors were able to calculate the canopy height, but again, it was done on a forestry area where it is reasonable to calculate the height, but it was not experimented on or even executed on urban area where there is a complex features exist. And that was again another concern, but another focus that we want, another area that we want to focus on. And another study that we looked at was using again satellite imagery, RBG and near infrared, which had RBG and near infrared bands. However, the ground truth that they used were architect DEM, and the issue is we cannot get an architect DEM for every country, especially on the south side. So that was another concern, which we cannot, even though if we come up with a model that will get an a canopy height in urban area, it won't be feasible or usable around the countries that cannot get architect DEM created for those. So that was the major concern on that. So above, looking at all the above studies that we went over, majority of them are focusing on human workforce, aerial patrolling, and UAV to get any kind of height measurements of trees or vegetation height around power lines. So we want to focus, or I want to focus on getting the canopy height across the region, especially around power line corridor. So my goal is to again get a model developed to derive vegetation height over 6 months. So from any point in time, I want to take satellite imagery that is available in a given region and calculate how was the vegetation is being grown in last 6 months. And I have to use LiDAR as a ground truth. So I will be using LiDAR, which I'll be getting it from one of the Texas open data hub, and I'll be explaining that later. And again, as I explained, the outcome is going to show the vegetation growth trend for last 6 months around power line corridor. So in this analysis, I have 3 steps that I need to focus on. First, I need to calculate the land classification. The reason for that is, first I need to find vegetation area. Where are the vegetation areas that I need to find canopy height? I don't see a point of running this analysis on entire power line corridor where there is no vegetation at all. So first I want to find the vegetation area using a land classification method, and then out of the output from that analysis, I want to focus on the areas where vegetation is required, or vegetation exists, and I want to run this model which will calculate the canopy height for those regions, and then use a statistical model or a machine learning model to identify the areas where we'll see the fast growth in terms of vegetation in last 6 months, and show it as a graph or the locations on a map. That is my goal for this research. So my area of interest is going to be Tarrant County in Texas, and in Tarrant County, I'll be downloading the LiDAR cloud. To take one step back, I'll be using power lines as a vector data, and I'll be using LiDAR cloud points, which will be downloaded from Texas Open Hub, and I'll be using Sentinel-2 images for calculating the canopy height. Now, the first data source is a power line data. Of course, I need to know the power line data, or where those power line exist. So to do that, I'm going to run a command on OpenStreetMap website to get the center line of the power lines, which can be downloaded into a shapefile, and I'll be creating a buffer around that center line, and then running or downloading satellite images around the buffers first as a first step. And then once I have the power lines with the buffers, then I have to download, or I have to get the LiDAR data for those regions, and I'll be downloading that LiDAR data from Texas Open Hub, and I already reviewed the data, and we have unclassified, as in LiDAR cloud points, we have unclassified bare earth ground, and water, high noise, and the ignored ground. And I will be using only the class 2, which is bare earth ground laser points or point clouds, and using that as a ground truth for this analysis. And also I'll be downloading Sentinel-2 imagery with 10, which has a 10-meter resolution with RGB and near infrared spectrum. So the first step, as I said before, it was finding the vegetations around the power line corridor. So to do that, I'll be using ArcGIS cover classification deep learning package, which is open source deep learning package, which is available for all Esri ArcGIS users. I'll be downloading that package, and that package is already pre-trained for land classification. And once I have that package and ran that package on Sentinel-2 imagery, I'll have a region. I'll have a region of vegetation and non-vegetation areas. So I'll be using that output from this deep learning package for the next analysis. And that package runs on any kind of raster or mosaic data set with 10-meter cell size, and output is a classified raster. And it uses unit model architecture, and of course it's a pre-trained. So I don't have to pre-train, or I don't have to actually it's already pre-trained, so I don't have to do any extra work on the model. The next step in this process is running the convolutional neural networks on the output from the previous model. Now, this model is to identify the height on the satellite imagery. Now I have 3 models or 3 architectures that I'm looking at. One is ResNet inspection, ResNet V2, and UNet with ResNet encoder. So these are the 3 architectures that I will be focusing on to generate the canopy height from the Sentinel-2 satellite imageries. The expectation again is to get the canopy height from this model. For this model, I need to train the model, and also I need to identify the batch size, iterations, and also the training samples actually at the time of research. Unfortunately, I cannot do it before, so I have to do or run this model and also identify the samples, epochs, and iteration during the experiment. So the goal for this model is to give me an output of canopy height. The anticipated results of this analysis is to get a vegetation growth around power lines, which will give a final map to any vegetation team or utility companies have a last 6 months of vegetation growth around their power line corridor. And also another focus that I'm going to do is just ability to rerun this model every month, so that they'll have an updated vegetation growth for last 6 months. So they can run every month and see how the trend goes, and they can or the companies can arrange their vegetation team or plan their vegetation team to focus on certain areas. And I'm seeing 2 potential risks on this analysis. One is the 10-meter resolution might not be suitable. So there is an alternative where we can use planet imagery with a high resolution. I believe it's 1 meter resolution, and I think it can be downloaded for educational purpose. So I think that can be mitigated. Another risk that I can see is a CCN deep learning model might not give me an output. It's so either I have to retrain those with accurate batch samples, or I need to find an alternative machine learning approach, which will of course decrease the accuracy, but it will give me to an extent where we can work with the vegetation height. So those are the anticipated results and the risks that I can see for this analysis. And I've broke down my project timeline. I gave in terms of weeks. I have to start with identifying the platform where I can develop deep learning model, data gathering, land classification, and identifying the deep learning model and training those models and executing those models on the study area and evaluating those deep learning model results with LiDAR outputs for verification purpose, and generating a 6 months vegetation trend growth and showing the results in a story map and documentation for 2 weeks. And I'm planning to present this next year in March in ISRI Developer Summit in 2023. That is a goal as of now. And these are the reference that I've used. Any questions?
All right, Pransa, thank you very much for your presentation. Certainly a very practical application of technology. While we're waiting for questions here, I had a question. You mentioned a lot about vegetation in your talk. I wonder if there'd be a way that you could improve your efficiency somewhat, instead of just looking at vegetation, perhaps focus on just those land cover classes that are more relevant. For example, forest. If you're looking at grassland, I don't think grass is really a problem with the utility corridor. It's more forest and, those kind of classes. So I didn't know if you had thought about narrowing in on your land class cover types more specifically.
Makes sense. I think again, like you said, grass is not going to be a concern at all. I think we're looking at the trees or the forest areas. I think the canopies that we will be focusing on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, looks like if you open up the chat window, there's a question for you.
Okay. Have you heard of it? Yes, eCognition. Yes, I did work with that software in one of the class. I'm planning to evaluate as much as I can on all the softwares, and I'm majorly trying to use SaaS products. If it's not possible, yes, I'll be using desktop softwares, and the output can be delivered through a SaaS product at that point of time.
It looks like that's the last question. If anyone has any other questions, Prasanth, if you could put your email in the chat window.
Yes.
That way people can contact you later if they have a question.
Yes, I can do that.
And one little note for the presenters, earlier in the chat, Beth put a link to the peer review form that the presenter should pay attention to and fill out. If you complete that in the next day or two, that'd be helpful.
So we'll do it. Thank you.
All right, thanks again, Prasanth.
Thank you.
Last for our presentation today is Cody Gillum. And Cody, if you want to share your screen. All right, looks good, looks good. All right, so for our last presenter, we have Captain Cody Gillum, who is going to be speaking to us today about field artillery site suitability analysis.
Good afternoon. I am Captain Cody Gillum. My proposal is to conduct a field artillery. Excuse me, just 1 second. Site suitability analysis using ArcGIS Pro. My advisor is Dr. Fritz Kessler. Here's our agenda. So professional background, I'm a captain in the United States Army. I am a field artillery officer. My career path, I've been a fire support officer at the company, battalion, and brigade levels. I've also been a platoon leader and a battery commander. The mission of the field artillery is to destroy, defeat, or disrupt the enemy with integrated fires to enable maneuver commanders to dominate in unified land operations. And that definition is straight out of Army Doctrine Reference Publication 3-09. And from this mission arises the emplacement problem. Where do we emplace the howitzers? How do we find these locations? As howitzers cannot just be placed in any location on the earth. Three howitzers we currently use today are on the left, the M119 Alpha 2 Alpha 3, which is a towed howitzer that fires a 105 millimeter shell. In the middle, the M777 Alpha 2, which fires a 155 millimeter shell and is also towed. And then the M109 Alpha 6 Alpha 7 on the right, which is self-propelled and fires a 155 millimeter shell. I'll show you the video of an M119 Alpha 3 conducting direct fire. As you can see, the howitzer packs quite a punch. So the howitzer comes from the manufacturer with limitations, right out of the box, if you will. In the figure on the left, you'll see an M119 Alpha 3. And the side slope, which is the main limitation, is perpendicular to the firing of the howitzer. And the max side slope is 5 degrees as represented by the blue triangle underneath the picture. Exceeding 5 degrees is extremely dangerous as the howitzer could flip over. And the only two things keeping the howitzer firmly seated are the base plate and the rear spade. So emplacement limitations. The howitzer's emplacement limitations are 5 degrees side slope, terrain, and land cover. Underneath the wheels, you can see the base plate on the right, just under the center of the howitzer. And then on to the left towards the rear, you'll see a shovel-like mechanism that digs into the earth every time that the howitzer is fired. And those are the only two things that are keeping the howitzer firmly seated on the ground. So optimal criteria for emplacement. The desired land cover is bare earth, grassland, or sparsely vegetated areas, a less than 5 degrees side slope. As seen here in this picture, that would be an optimal location based on the land cover and slope for a howitzer to be emplaced. On the figure on the right, it's just an example of the 4 terrain extremes, hilly, wooded, flat, and open, and you can imagine all the possibilities in between those 4 terrain extremes. Apologize, just one second, the drawing tool is not popping up. I don't see the option today. So the current site selection process, it begins with a visual inspection of a topographic map. These maps are paper maps, and we also utilize paper and digital satellite imagery. First thing you're going to do as a field artillery planner is you're going to receive your mission, and that mission is to support a maneuver unit somewhere on the battlefield. And from there, you're going to determine likely locations where you want to send the howitzer batteries. If you look at the image, you'll see in the upper right, the topographic maps has a big green 19. You can see those white areas on the map. Those are areas that are supposed to be open area that most likely we can emplace howitzers on. So as a battery commander, I would receive my mission. You're going to go to this area labeled 19, and you're going to emplace in one of these open areas. So I'm going to go there with my battery, and I'm going to hopefully find an open area that they gave me. And then at that grid, I'm going to emplace my 6 howitzers. After everyone is in place and the howitzers are firing, my next job is to locate my next firing positions. I have to identify more firing positions because I'm going to utilize this one. And after so many fire missions, or let's say an hour is the criteria that I'm given, I have to move my battery to a new location. So when I get to my current location, my first job is to locate my next 3 positions. So if I'm moving from east to west, that's right to left on your screen, I'm going to locate 3 other positions that are open terrain using this topographic map, hopefully verify it with satellite imagery, and then I'm going to physically drive with approximately 6 other personnel to these locations. So as I get to one location, I'll determine whether it's suitable. If it is, I'll annotate it, and then we'll move on to our next location. At this time, I've probably been gone from the battery for approximately 2 to 3 hours just for one location. In my next location, I'll identify, and if it's not suitable, we'll annotate it, and we'll move on to the 3rd location. Once I get to the 3rd location, then I'll identify whether it's suitable or not. If it is, annotate it, and then I will move back to the battery. At this point, I've been gone 4 or 5 hours, and then while I'm gone, the battery is having to operate and shoot their howitzers, on their own. And if anything happens, now someone there, one of the platoon leaders will have to make a decision. So as you can probably see in the site selection limitations that we currently use, they take time. They're prone to errors because I'm using outdated maps, and they require my eyes on for accuracy. Because as a commander, it is your responsibility to ensure that the howitzers get to where they need to go, and you need to make sure that that location is suitable for firing. It also requires knowledge about geography. We do a lot of land navigation training, and you have to be able to read a topographic map and understand what you're looking at on the map. The research objective is to have intelligence in a system that generates locations that are suitable for emplacement, that provides automated results based on these 3 basic criteria: slope, aspect, and land cover. The problem statement is using ArcGIS to enable site suitability analysis for field artillery emplacements. And I'm doing this because I've been our current processes. I have made decisions knowing they aren't accurate, and I'm probably putting people at risk and wasting time. I'm hoping to find an automated solution that enables rapid site selection, enables safe firing, saves time, and prevents putting people at unnecessary risk. The general workflow: step 1, we download the data, which is Landsat 8 and Sentinel-2 imagery, as well as the digital elevation model. And from there, create the base layers from the DEM, slope, and aspect, and then use the Sentinel-2 imagery to classify grass, water, paved, urban, and forest land cover. And then from there, conduct the analysis to identify land cover that meets criteria, aspect that meets criteria, as well as slope. The study I've chosen is Fort Polk, Louisiana. This is the Joint Readiness Training Center. This is one of the premier training centers in the United States. The other one is the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. What this training center provides is wooded and mixed terrain, and it is really an extreme challenge for a field artillery officer to identify areas for emplacement due to the number of the amount of wooded area. The opposite is National Training Center. There is no wooded area. It is predominantly desert, open terrain with a few mountains scattered around. The data, Landsat imagery with 30 meter by 30 meter will be used for general and visual analysis. Sentinel imagery will be 10 meter by 10 meter and used to identify grassland cover that is suitable, as it provides more accurate land cover classification. And then the digital elevation model will be used to create slope, aspect, and hillshade. Methods, all the tools that I'll be using will be located in ArcGIS Pro. Conduct an unsupervised land cover classification using maximum likelihood classification. Slope and aspect utilizing raster tools. And then I'll reclassify all three of those layers to identify what meets criteria. And then utilizing the raster calculator, the final output will be from those three layers, what meets criteria. So the data layers, intermediate data layers, on the left, it's pretty straightforward, the land cover classification. The areas in green are forest, and what meets criteria is everything in yellow based on land cover class alone. In the bottom right, slope used to identify the areas that are 5 degrees or less. And then aspect comes into play identifying slope that is perpendicular to the direction of fire. As mentioned earlier, the slope that is perpendicular to the direction of fire is what is critical, as that 5 degrees could cause a howitzer to tip over. And then utilizing those three layers combined, using reclassify and raster calculator, produce the areas that are suitable for emplacement. The preliminary results shown here, everything in brown meets criteria for east-west firing, and that's firing towards the east or towards the west only for this image here. Everything that is brown and overlaid on yellow in this landing zone is what meets criteria. The total training area is approximately 280 square kilometers. In this area here, you can imagine just a giant field in the middle of the woods. It's approximately 2 square kilometers, and only those areas in brown meet criteria for howitzers firing directly east or directly west. So you can see that I'm severely restricted. After conducting this analysis, it shows of where I can and cannot fire directly east or west. If I was using a topographic map alone and I didn't have this data available and I'm firing to the west, which is to your left, I would choose the tree line to the right towards the east of this landing zone as the predominant location where I'm going to place my howitzers. And that is based on the tree line that is available there. So I can tuck my howitzers in there for security from aerial observation, which is usually planes or helicopters looking for me. As you can see, if you look to the eastern portion of the landing zone, those areas in brown are few and far between. So I can see that I'm going to be spaced out more than I normally would be. So if you can imagine one of those howitzers in the pictures previous, they're approximately 100 meters apart. And now looking at this image, they are going to be 300 to 400 meters apart, which presents a security issue for the entire battery. And that is because we have to secure ourselves. There's no one providing security for us. one of the outputs that I do want to provide is one layer that shows all directions that are able to fire from each of these locations in yellow. That way I can get a good image or a good picture of what is actually available to fire in all directions. For analysis improvements, I want to include LiDAR data so I can capture and visualize the tree height and other structures, as well as the distance from objects, because I can only get so close to an object in front of me. The closer I am to a tree or a building, the less range I have while firing howitzers. I also want to include water as a major portion of the analysis, because this land cover classification, for instance, if I take a chemical attack, I have to have a significant amount of water to conduct decontamination in order to continue conducting combat operations. Other study areas I want to include, as mentioned, the Fort Irwin, California National Training Center, which is mountainous and desert. And then the Fort Campbell, Kentucky training area, which is less wooded than Fort Polk and is generally flat. Future direction for this analysis is the proof of concept converted into a mobile web application. The web application will remove the operator from using ArcGIS Pro and having to have that requisite knowledge of how to use that program, and then search for a willing contractor for development. So the application, step one, I'll choose a location based on a topographic map. There you can see on step one, next to the number 20, there's an open area. This is where I want to go. Step two, I'll input my azimuth of fire. The azimuth of fire is the direction of fire that the howitzer is facing. And you input 5600, which in the military we use mils instead of degrees, and there are 6,400 mils in a circle, which provides increased accuracy. And then step three, the application will provide an output that shows you the range rings of where you can reach from that location based on its suitability. And if it's not suitable, you'd receive an error message saying that you need to find a new location. For my timeline, in August of this year, refine the workflow and process and conduct and finalize the analysis on the 3 study areas. September, finalize the paper, and in October, submit for publication in the Field Artillery Journal. And I'm Captain Cody Gillum. I do appreciate everyone's time. Here's my email if you have any questions, and we will now move into the formal questions portion.
All right, thanks, Cody. Looks like you have some questions in the chat window. Will you please remember, read the question before you answer.
This is from Dr. Bakastel. It seems that the war in Ukraine has highlighted some old lessons and is teaching us some new about the employment of artillery in combat. Counter battery fire and concealment from drones are a few. Do you plan to study and incorporate these lessons when you build or evaluate your site selection model? Sir, for sure, the counter battery is probably one of the #1 things we worry about when shooting artillery. And I am working on identifying how to develop that criteria to include in this analysis, which my thoughts are right now that those areas that are suitable based on slope and the land cover classification, which I need to refine on how to find those sparsely vegetated areas so I can hide my howitzers in the tree line. And this is from Daniel Steiner. Cody, have you worked with geospatial engineers, 12 Yankee military occupational specialty in your career or on any training exercises? To answer that one, I do know a few 12 Yankees, the geospatial engineers, and I do currently work with and help train some 12 Yankees on what they do. Your project is important and addresses the concerns you have with the current battery firing site selection process. As you step into GEOG 596B, you might see that additional resources your local geospatial engineer unit has for your areas of study. Yes, sir, I do plan on showing this study to the 12 Yankees that are local here with me and see if I can get their opinions and input on this analysis. So I think Dr. Backerstyle just provided a good point that the Russians have the capability to model likely locations too. And that is another aspect of this analysis that I want to refine as well. As we can use this to utilize the criteria for the Russian emplacements, their howitzers. And then if I can identify where they're going to be located, whether they're there or not in a future war, we might just target those areas that are suitable for field artillery emplacements.
All right, great job, Cody. If you could put your contact info in the chat window, if you want us to follow up with you at some later point, you can. Just a quick reminder for the presenters, make sure that you complete the peer review form. That link is in the chat window a little earlier. Otherwise, I appreciate your attendance today and all the questions and engaging talks. Very good. I wish everyone the best of luck with the 596B, and we'll see you all later. Bye.